My name is Jeremy, and together with Pastor Chuck and Gina, we've begun a series on Nehemiah. And if Pastor Chuck promises not to mock Central Oregon snow, we might let him back up here in a week or two. When we introduce a series, whether it's a book or someone's life like Nehemiah, we do it with the hope and the goal that all of you are going to engage the story. And my job on a Sunday morning is to give you things to think and to chew on all week long as you continue to reflect on what is it that Nehemiah did? Why did he do it that way? How am I supposed to do those things in my community? So my job is to overwhelm you in 20 minutes with all kinds of things that are going to fill up your mind and your heart and your soul all week long. To say, I want to be like Nehemiah. I want to do the things that he did in my community. Nehemiah is one of my heroes. And my job is fairly easy because there is so much in just the first chapter or two of Nehemiah. Not only is there a ton of great material and principles for engaging our community in these first chapters, but it's quite an interesting time to reflect on what it's like to build a wall for your community. And the wall is such a powerful and potentially confusing symbol. And that's part of the joy and the danger of engaging Nehemiah's story now, is there's such potential to cause emotional reactions to building a wall, but also such potential to contrast the way that we do things to the way that God does things. And we really hope that as we go through this story of what it means to build a wall for our community, that you would not take it in any way that we are proposing for or against any kind of political agenda. We absolutely do not have anything to say about whether we build a wall or not on the Mexico border. That's not what this is about. But I do want to use our culture, our experience, as a community in 2019 to reflect on what it's like for God to build a wall. What does that mean for God's people to build a wall, and how do we do it in a way that impacts and benefits our community in a way that the world can't? So when we introduce a series that says God rebuild us, I am challenged to think, well, what do we mean by us? God rebuild us. Do we mean white people? Rebuild us? Do we mean the people of Redmond? Why does Ben get all the attention? Rebuild us, Redmond. Do we mean conservative Christians? Do we mean Desert Song Church? Because as we look at Nehemiah's prayer in chapter 1, when he says, God rebuild us, he's referring to the poor and the broken of our community. Rebuild us, the poor and the broken. So if you will allow me to quickly review last week's episode in Nehemiah 1, where Nehemiah humbled himself in prayer before God. He heard about what was happening in Israel, and he fell down, and he prayed, and he mourned, and he identified with the people back in Israel. He was Jewish, but he was captive. He was highly educated, in a position of power. He had everything going for him. He lived in a palace. And yet he fell to the floor, and he identified with the farmers and the shepherds who were left back in poverty and brokenness back in Israel. He identified with them. And from the time that his brother showed up and told him what was going on to the time that he met with the king was 5 or 6 months. 5 or 6 months he was praying and he was broken and he was identifying for the suffering that was happening back with his people. And I am hugely challenged because Nehemiah took this vertical relationship that he had with God in prayer, and he intentionally made room for a horizontal relationship between him and his people. Even though it must have been hard for him to identify with what was going on, he couldn't conceive in his palace, in his job with all the fancy dressed courtesans and all these people. He couldn't even conceive, but in his prayer with God, he made room for the horizontal. He made room for solidarity because he, from the very beginning, and I can't move on to chapter 2 until we get this, in approaching a pressing social need, he did not approach it from superiority, but from solidarity. It was not what he could bring to the problem. Instead, he made room in his prayer for the horizontal. God, forgive us. We have sinned. We have been disobedient. We are broken. Please remember your promise to us. Redeem us again. And I just try and imagine what that would be like for us. God, please remember the pregnant teens in me. Please redeem us. Lord, please send help to the meth addicts and to me. We need your help. The homeless, the atheists, the homosexuals, the Republicans. Lord, save us. We need your help. We have caused these problems. It's on us. We're part of it. Lord, send us your help. Rebuild us. And I want you to notice from the very beginning, as we contrast how Nehemiah approached building a wall. Because our work flows from an opposite cause. An opposite cause. We're not building a wall for self-protection. We're building a wall because we are heartbroken in identifying with people in need. That is the source of our work. Heartbrokenness for people in need. That's where our work begins. And we cannot move on to chapter 2 until you start in chapter 1 in Nehemiah's prayer. There were a couple of times, I won't say it was often, when I would look out over our village in Mongolia. I think I have a picture of it. It didn't happen regularly. It didn't happen often. But on occasion, I would look out over the village that we lived in, about 11,000 people on the edge of town, of over 100,000. And God's Spirit would come on me, and I would just say, God, please withhold your wrath from these people, from my people. Withhold your wrath. You see the anger, the alcohol, the domestic violence. Please withhold your wrath just a little bit longer. Please give them time to receive your gospel in your church. Give them a chance. And then I look at a picture of Redmond, which I think I also have, and I ask myself, how come I don't feel that way about my town now?
Yeah, that's good.
God, how come you do not break my heart for this town, for the things that are broken in this place? It's so important because God starts with who, not what. God starts with who. Who is he breaking your heart for? That's where our work begins, not with what. It's easy to start with what. I have a snow shovel, so I'll go out and I'll dig out a few driveways. You know, it's a what. And as soon as the driveways are dug out, the job's done. Right? But it's from a completely different place from where Nehemiah was starting. A different starting place. And I think there's so much capacity in our families and in our life groups that we are experiencing all kinds of new and fresh relationship in our vertical relationship, personal freedoms that we're finding in Christ vertically. And I don't know if the horizontal is happening. Are we bringing the poor and broken around the dinner table? Are we bringing the poor and the broken into our life groups? God rebuild us. So Nehemiah goes through this process of heartbrokenness, something I do not envy and yet I long for at the same time. And he sets out on a journey. So we'll be jumping through Nehemiah chapter 2, starting with verse 9. And we'll do a few verses at a time. Nehemiah says, "Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river, and I gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent me with officers of the army and horsemen. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that a man had come to seek the welfare of the children of Israel." Now I want to stop there, and I want to emphasize again what a great perspective Nehemiah had on unity. Because he understood vertical unity. Just take a look at these two verses. Nehemiah had spent the good part of a year lining all of this up, getting permission from the king, getting letters that he could take to the governors, getting a personal escort of officers from the army. Then there's this whole issue of local leadership and how they are going to respond to him. But then he talks about under that local leadership comes a man. And I love how he doesn't give himself any kind of special title. Just a man. A man has come to town who's seeking the welfare of the children. The king, the governors, the captains, the leaders, a man, and the children. The welfare of the children. Nehemiah understands vertical unity, much like Mongolians do. Very hierarchical. Who's the leader? You have to know who's above you and who's below you, because that's how you experience harmony. That's how you experience unity. Whereas our culture experiences unity this way. Everybody has to be the same, and then you're unified. But if you impose any kind of vertical unity, it destroys everything. But Nehemiah was very complex. He understood vertical unity and horizontal unity. And he'd spent a year or so setting up this vertical unity. Everything was in perfect line of authority. The only question mark in these first two verses is the local leaders. How are the local leaders going to respond? Because the first couple weren't very happy. Not sure this is going to go very well at all. So Nehemiah comes to Jerusalem. And here I'd like to turn the lights off because he goes on a little journey at night. I mean, we're talking like SEAL Team 6. Nobody hardly even knows he's come to town. And you have to remember that Jerusalem was completely destroyed. It was one of the last holdouts of the empire. So it was like a ghost town. Everything had been broken down. Then the few people had moved back and were starting to rebuild the temple, but it really wasn't a safe place to do business or to build your home or anything. So Nehemiah went by night, and he went around and he was checking all the bits and pieces. You also have to remember that Nehemiah was an outsider. Yes, he was Jewish, but he had probably never, ever lived in Israel himself. I mean, just imagine somebody coming from California who's going to say they're going to come into Redmond and make it a great town. You know, who are you? I mean, yeah, you're American, but a Californian? I mean, you're barely American. So Nehemiah himself, right? He doesn't live there. He doesn't know the problems they've been through. He doesn't know the town. He himself goes around and he personally investigates every inch. Where is there still rock available that's been broken down? How are we going to transport more rock around these walls? How are we going to fix the gates and make sure they work? You know, is there anything that we can use? Everything. He goes around and he personally investigates it all so that he understands the challenges that are going to be faced and he can answer any of the hard questions. This too is a great contrast because our leaders, when they want to solve a problem, they begin with a public announcement. I'm going to build a wall. Our work begins with an opposite task. Our work begins with personal investigation, not public announcements. Anyone can stand up and say, I'm against abortion, or I'm against bump stocks. Everybody has an opinion, and nobody, especially in the age of social media, nobody cares what your opinion is. Do you understand the situation of people who are going through decisions about what to do with an unwanted pregnancy? Have you personally investigated the things that are going on in their families? Maybe use of substances, maybe dysfunctional parenting. What are the options? Do you understand what it looks like to give your child up for open adoption? Have you personally investigated the things that you are so public about? This is the very first task we have to understand. You can't come and say, I know what's best, and we all just need to do it. Instead, go around like a learner. I've never been in this place before. I need to understand what we're talking about if I'm going to answer the hard questions with realistic, effective solutions. Nehemiah, after he's investigated the city, finally he's ready to call together the local leaders. In 16, the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. I love how he includes all the leaders, not just the religious leaders, but he includes the government workers and the nobles, who probably referred to the rich people, the business people. So the religious leaders, the government leaders, the economic leaders, he calls them all together and he says, you see the trouble that we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall, that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. Nehemiah brings the leaders together, and he introduces a problem, which they were very familiar with. But he introduces a problem and a solution. He's not just complaining about everything that's wrong. He comes with confidence. I'm prepared. Not only have I been preparing for a year for permissions and resources and plans, but I have personally investigated all. It's doable. It's very doable. It's time. Everything is ready. And he goes into the story, how God had revealed it to him, and how every step of the way he'd found favor in getting permission from the king to rebuild one of the most rebellious cities in that whole empire. Permission to get resources from all the governors, timber and stone and everything that was needed, free of charge. Personal escorts to protect him along the way. Everything God had been in. God had provided everything that they could possibly need in order to make it happen. And what Nehemiah does next really surprises me, because he doesn't use any of that line of authority. Again, he makes room for the horizontal unity. And he does that in quite an opposite way. He pursues an opposite kind of motivation, which I call divine invitation, as opposed to forceful manipulation. Divine invitation. He invites them. He invites them, hey, let's build this wall together. He doesn't say, well, this is what needs to be done, and I'm going to do it regardless of what you say. He doesn't say, let's vote on it, and as long as 51% of you are in favor, we're going to make it happen. He says, come on, let's build religious leaders, let's build the wall. Business leaders, let's build this wall. Government leaders, let's build this wall.
That's good. Yes.
He makes room for invitation. He's not using any kind of authority to make them do anything. And he's not coming in as their savior. Well, I'm super educated and I'm on a first name basis with the emperor. You know, I'm going to come in here and fix your problem, guys. Just tell me what it is. I'll make it happen. Boom, boom. I got letters. What do you need? And yet we do that all the time. What do these families need? Oh, they need a Thanksgiving meal. Well, you just sit back. We'll bring you turkeys. 5-pound turkeys. You may or may not be able to cook them in your tiny ovens. We'll fix your problem. That's not how Nehemiah did it. Nehemiah invited them into unity. Let's work on this together. I remember walking down the street with Oska. Oska is a Kazakh fellow living in Mongolia. And he looked over at me and I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was basically like, why are you helping me? I'm not a good person. And I said something to the effect, I said, I never thought you were a good person. Probably not how Jesus would have started his response. I said, Oscar, I never thought you were a good person. I believe that God has chosen you for something special. And God has given us a brotherly love for each other. And that God will redeem us. And as we pursue God and as we glorify Him, He's going to do something really special in our relationship. I invited him. Nehemiah took that vertical line of authority and he invited people into it. And he invited them into participation. Participation. See, our work results in an opposite kind of community that I call hope-filled participation instead of rebellion. If you come in with the right answer, if you come in with a 51% majority, guess what's going to happen to community? Rebellion. Every time, especially in our culture. Rebellion, rebellion, rebellion. Nehemiah comes in and he invites participation. Now, there were limits to that participation. It's interesting. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing that you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" I can almost see them with their phones taking video. Look at these guys. They're starting to rebuild the wall. Well, I'm going to post that, and the king is going to see it, and they're going to get in trouble. Then I replied to them, "The God of heaven will make us prosper. We, his servants, will rise and build, but you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem." I absolutely love how he did not respond whatsoever to their fake news. No response. He didn't even acknowledge it. It's not worth responding to. What he was saying to them is, because you have no idea whatsoever about this vertical relationship that we have, not just with the king, but with the God of heaven who has made all of these things ready to happen. Because you have no unity whatsoever with the God of heaven, you are not ready for any kind of horizontal unity. You have no part in this city. You have no part in our activities. You will not participate with us. And that is fairly exclusive, which is a bad word in our culture. And yet very necessary. There must be limits. And even though we could easily say, oh, look at the Jews banded together and they were building a wall to keep everybody out and excluding everybody, just like Christians do. But I want you just to take a chance this week to read chapter 3. Read chapter 3. I'm sure it's going to remind you of Leviticus because it's pretty boring and it's going to be hard to pronounce all the names. But read chapter 3 and tell me, was their activity exclusive? Priests, goldsmiths, perfumers, town and district rulers, Levites, merchants, people from Tekoa, people from Gibeon, people from Maranatha, people from Zanoah, people from all kinds of regions, all kinds of trades, business people, artists, government workers, religious leaders, all on their hands and knees together, digging, carrying rocks, together, building gates for their community. You cannot get more inclusive. Take a look at the church. Take a look at the church as opposed to any neighborhood in America or any other religion in the world. And tell me, is the church not absolutely inclusive? You've never seen such a diversity of economic backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. Here in Central Oregon, which is one of the least diverse places in the country, take a look at how inclusive our churches are. Much less, we have people from Uganda. We have people from all kinds of backgrounds. Chinese churches, there is nowhere more diverse in human history than the church. And as they, on their hands and knees working together, began to see a wall starting to form, I can just picture Nehemiah, who saw people starting to form. Our leaders, intent on building a wall, seem to be tearing our community apart. But when I read Nehemiah, I see Jesus. I see Jesus riding into my town on a donkey. I see him quietly come into town. I see him climb off of his donkey and walk down my street. And he stops at each house and he looks. And not only does he see the houses, but he sees the people. All of those who are burned out and broken. He sees everything when he walks down our streets. And he weeps. He weeps over our town just like he wept over Jerusalem. And I pray that you would continue these discussions this week around your dining room tables and in your life groups as you reflect on the one who identifies with us, the outsider who didn't need to, but who came and who perfectly identifies with us in our weaknesses, who takes our sufferings upon himself, the one who meets us where we are, the one who identifies with us, who invites us, the one who invites us to participate with him, the one who takes us by the shoulders, who looks into our eyes and who says, "Do you see the trouble that we are in? Do you see the trouble we're in, our community?" And he says, "The hand of my Father is upon me, and he has made all things ready to do what needs to be done." Come, let us rise up and build.